This is the Analysis in Chains with Nathan Williams and Neil Kieran.
Welcome to Analysis in Chains. I'm Nathan Williams. Joining me today is Jelle Pol and Emanuele Francioni from Dusk Network. Guys, thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure, Nathan. It's very good to be here.
It's absolutely a pleasure.
Dusk Network is sort of a next-generation base protocol for a privacy coin. Tell me a little bit about the problem that you guys were trying to solve when you came up with Dusk Network.
The problem that we are trying to solve, we always had in mind a protocol to enter the regulated market. You know, in this specific instance, we are talking about security tokens. Whenever you are talking about the regulated market, then you have to have two different things. One is privacy, and the other is a set of restrictions that bind the securities or the actors or the traders, transactors within the regulated market to transact only with other KYC and AML and compliant transactors. You know, we tried at the very beginning to use any other protocol out there like Ethereum, but the problem is that we couldn't really, enforce these two different characteristics. And therefore, we had to come up with a new blockchain, if you want, or a new technical proposition platform that would have both privacy and token trading restrictions embedded in the core. And that is the reason why we created Dusk.
Essentially, as I understand it, you've redone an entire base layer protocol so that you can do transactions completely anonymously. It obscures who's sending the tokens, who's receiving them, all of that, but yet it still validates 100% that everybody has been KYC and AML'd?
In a way, yes. So basically what we have, or the platforms allow third parties to issue their own security tokens on top of this base protocol. So the base layer, in order to transact across the base layer, so to transact in Dusk, you do not have to be KYC. You do not have to be, just compliant with a certain particular regulated framework. But if you issue security tokens using our own protocol, our own interface, which we call XST, which stands for Confidential Security Token, then in that particular case, then that token, which relates one-to-one to the issuer, that token needs to provide to the regulators the certainty that the transactors have been KYC'd and AML. And in that particular perspective, Dusk offers the capability to these issuers to commit the outcome of the KYC and AML process within the network using zero-knowledge cryptography. Essentially, this means that if somebody went through KYC and AML to acquire security A, let's say, then I can only transact with other people or other entities that have been going through the same process. But of course, the base protocol doesn't require KYC and AML to function.
So what you're saying is that if I, as Analysis in Chains, wanted to issue a security token, I could go on your protocol and create this security token, which would represent, say, shares of Analysis in Chains. Then I could do a token sale and require that everybody has been KYC and AML'd. We would receive that KYC and AML information. However, the regulators would only see that they have passed KYC and AML checks, not necessarily who those people were.
That's exactly right. And to add a little bit on that, the third-party issuer then it keeps being accountable for keeping the registry of the transactors, so the investors, and of all the different compliance methodology or vendor that they want to use. But that is where the openness of this system stops, because from that particular point in time, if anybody wants to trade this kind of security, they can do that in a confidential manner.
To my understanding, does this mean that there's still a single point of failure? Do I, as analysis in chains in this example, have a complete list of all the KYC and AML information? Is it just on the blockchain itself where the confidentiality is maintained?
Well, the confidentiality is the confidentiality of the transactions, right? There isn't really a single point of failure or anything, because the third-party issuers in a regulated market, it keeps being responsible for the actors or for the investors that owns the security certificates. And therefore, they are required by security law to keep the registry. So it's not really a single point of failure. It's basically something that they are required to do. But what we provide is the assurance that only those who have been and that are inside of this registry, which is maintained by the third party, and as soon as they are committed to the network, we can provide the certainty that only those that have been KYC and AML, they are transacting in the network according to a set of rules which we encode in something which we call a zero-knowledge smart contract.
So how has the adoption been so far? You guys have built up this network of nodes, of people that are transacting on the Dusk Network. You guys are getting ready to sell the tokens and then offer the ability for people to do security token offerings. How has the response been so far?
It's been pretty good, actually. So when you look at businesses that want to emit securities, right, or the secondary market of these securities, so investors or financial institutions, they actually see privacy as quite a strong requirement. What we often have to deal with is the misconception that privacy is the opposite of regulatory compliance. But especially in secondary markets, in financial markets, confidentiality is something that is quite key to a healthy trading environment. So, you've probably seen the news again the last few days in crypto land, right, where everyone is panicking because there's super old Bitcoin or Ether wallets moving, and it's leading to all types of manipulation. And in a healthy, regulated secondary market, this is usually, or at least frowned upon, and often deemed illegal. What we want to do is create a secondary market where these types of manipulations aren't possible anymore, where people can have the kind of trade secrecy they need to have certain strategies as a financial institution without losing any of the regulatory approvals. So we actually see that this mix of confidentiality and compliance works very well for the actual users and the participants in the secondary market. And it works very, very well for the issuing third parties as well, because it not only meets their requirements, but because it's a protocol, it's effectively free to use for them, which is a huge differentiator versus the perceived competition in the security space.
In most privacy protocols, there's going to be some sort of trade-off. Usually with everything crypto, there's some sort of trade-off. If you want increased
everything live.
Absolutely. You want increased privacy and transparency. You may end up losing in throughput. If you have better throughput, then maybe you lose decentralization. If you've got increased transparency, maybe you have decreased privacy. What have been the trade-offs that you've had to make that you've deemed worth it?
Well, one of the things that is key to note is that Dusk, we're building it specifically for these type of use cases, right? Disintermediating the regulated market without losing regulatory approval. This means that Dusk is not a general purpose smart contract platform like Ethereum is, for example. So whilst Ethereum could be better at 100 other things than Dusk would be, we are going to be much, much better at these specific use cases. So one of the trade-offs for sure has been to sacrifice some kind of generalization for excelling at the use cases that we want to focus on.
And when you're looking at the security of the network overall, a lot of question marks have risen up around base layer protocols, even the larger ones like Bitcoin, of how decentralized is it? How much trust do we have to play in it, and how much it's subject to politics? What have you done with Dusk to avoid these same type of issues?
From a technical perspective, then there are two different roles inside of the Dusk network. So whereas within proof of stake or proof of work, there is normally only one node which can or which gets to the solution of the cryptographic puzzle and can receive a reward, right? So this means that if somebody has, the highest hashing power, in the case of mining, so proof of work, or the highest stake for what concerns proof of stake, then it gets more resources to keep dominating the block generation system. In our case, we created a completely different consensus mechanism, which we call segregated Byzantine agreement. And in this consensus, we have two different roles. One is the block generator, and the other one is what we call the provisioners. So the block generator provides a certain particular block, and it does so by doing what we call a blind bid in order to receive or to calculate uninteractively a score that it propagates together with a block. And then the provisioners, they are BFT voters, so Byzantine fault tolerant voters, and they are also rewarded for participating in the voting system.
If I understand correctly, you have two different roles that normally in other blockchains would be in one role. You have the nodes that do the consensus, the Byzantine fault voting nodes, and then you have the block generator nodes. And by separating these roles and changing the incentives, you've effectively reduced the incentive to control the system or the ability to do so.
Yeah,
that's correct.
You've made it economically uninteresting to do so, right? And that's ultimately what we assume to be the majority motive: people participating to maximize their economic returns.
Would there be a possibility of people participating to have other goals? Like, I'm just thinking if you're doing security tokens, could it be possible that someone wants to devalue their competitors' stock or security tokens or something like that?
No, but it would have nothing to do with the Dusk currency, right?
No, I guess no. Not that I'm planning anything.
Yes, there's something we need to know, Nathan.
No. Absolutely not. So tell me, guys, you guys did a private sale. You went out and did a private token sale. How did that go?
It went well. I'm wrapping it up at the time of recording. By the time this goes out, we'll probably have our public announcement released with the final kind of tally and results. We spent a good chunk of the last 2 months on it, and arguably quite a tough market. But the proposition made enough sense for a very healthy amount of investment. So very pleased with that.
Wonderful. And I did want to ask about that. Given how difficult the market was in the past 2 months, with Bitcoin falling below 4,000, with a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the market in general, what was your approach to doing a pure tokens, currency token sale, and how did people respond to it?
Well, selling a protocol is always a little bit more difficult, I suppose, because it really you need to have a certain technical understanding and a little bit of vision, because it's not as easy as saying we're the Uber of X, right? Or something conceptually easy to digest. So you're always aiming for a slightly different crowd. It's also very much a market where a lot of VCs, etc., are going for pure equity plays because it's safer, or it's not really their mandate to invest in things that are actually decentralized because, it gives them very little
control.
Power on yeah, exactly. With regards to the profits they are mandated to create. which I think is a very interesting discussion by itself, because a lot of these VCs obviously love to preach the nobility of decentralization, but their actual walking the walk says something very, very different. But I guess that's a whole separate topic. But yeah, so you have to really learn how to spread the gospel, translate it down into a type of story that makes sense to the masses, and then if you can showcase, hey, this is what we're building and this is what we're solving. We have a very deep understanding both on the business side and the technical side. And this is also why the native currency of this network is going to capture some of the value that this protocol will deliver. That's when you start to make a case that can still cut through the noise even in this market.
Now, when you're going out like that, do you approach certain geographies more than others? Or like I've heard tell that Asian roadshows tend to be more productive than European ones right now.
That is absolutely true. So we have been focusing primarily on the European market. That meant that we were talking about trade-off, right? So we knew already that probably going for an Asian roadshow and trying to raise funds in Korea and Japan and Singapore and these places was probably going to be a little more, a little easier. But this is not my first rodeo. I had different kind of startups, and I have been making a lot of mistakes, and hopefully I've been learning from them. And one of the mistakes that I made, and I have seen a lot of different other propositions making, is to go global from day one. So focusing on a certain particular niche, whether it is territorial or whether it is in terms of functionality or in terms of technology, just do one thing and do it well, means that you are not really diluting your efforts. When we are talking about security legislation, I heard about a lot of different propositions that try to provide a solution to all the different territories, all the different legislations out there, to provide a global protocol or a global solution. That is extremely costly, because you really do need to learn and to just work out a myriad of exceptions that really do not work well together. Whereas if you keep your the territorial harmonized, or you focus on a harmonized territory or a harmonized legislation, you just need to provide one sort of flavor, and you really need to focus on that. So for us, it didn't really make much sense to break through the security token market to the newborn security token market with all the different uncertainties about legislation, regulations, and these kind of things, and try to do that for territories and legislations that were probably a little easier to fundraise in, but that would be completely very, very difficult for us to cover. So that is the decision that we made, and we focused on the European Union because the law is harmonized there. Securities have been around forever. There are a lot of people that try to imagine different kind of regulation, new legislations, but we simply took a framework that was already there, that was already working, and we try to digitalize it, decentralize it, create a protocol that would fit very well that particular framework. And then we saw a lot of propositions, Asian proposition even, moving to Europe. And initially we saw the big exchange, Binance, OKX, that moved to Malta. And then we started to see also, security token propositions that contacted us and want to issue in Europe, because the regulation or the regulatory framework in Europe is a little friendlier than US, and it's more convenient. And the legislation, the security legislation, is mature and well understood. And of course, there are a lot of innovations that are going on. So far, our message has been very well received globally, but our focus is definitely in EU.
Well, it sounds like you guys are well on the road. What can we expect from you guys in the coming couple of months?
There's a few things coming up for sure. So by the time this goes out, we should just barely be live and listed and tradable with the token on the Bitfinex and Ethfinex exchanges. Then obviously heading into that holiday season and onto a January/Q1 testnet with the goal of early Q2 mainnet. So let's say that April-May timeline with a concurrent business goal to launch up to 10 STOs alongside the Dusk mainnet in that first 1 to 2 months. So very exciting 6 months coming up, and people can check out all that kind of details in our various social media, all linked via dusk.network.
Fascinating. Well, guys, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much for coming on. Emanuele Francioni, did I get it? Oh, perfect.
Absolutely.
And Jelle Pol, the co-founders of Dusk Network, doing STOs in a privacy-based blockchain. Guys, best of luck going forward, and good luck with your rollout.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for hosting us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.